I'm Karen Woolhouse. I grew up in Canada and spent my working years in the US as a permanent resident. I'm now retired and I'm a member of UU congregations in Halifax, Nova Scotia and Lake County, Florida. I also spent 3 winters in San Miguel, where I was a member of UUFSMA, and I was privileged to serve on the endowment committee. Like everyone else, I can remember exactly where I was when the news broke on September 11th, 2001. That morning, my furniture had been loaded on the moving van to go from my home in Stamford, Connecticut, just north of New York City, to my new home back in Halifax, Nova Scotia, where I grew up. I was sitting at the kitchen counter when my nephew called to tell me the news and ask if I was okay, since I often went into the city. I walked down to the marina on Stamford Harbor and saw across the water the plume of smoke rising from the World Trade Center as they burned. The rest of the day was spent in a neighbor's apartment watching the TV. I remember the shock and incredulity at the idea that the World Trade Center could actually be burning with all those people trapped inside, and the horror that someone had thought of using airplanes loaded with innocent passengers as missiles to cause the fires. There was the empathy with the people on those airplanes flying to their doom. Remember the tearful final cell phone calls to people on the ground? We were glued to our TV sets that day. Meanwhile, US airspace had been closed to non-military travel. So the flights in the air on the way to the US from Europe could not continue and had to land and wait for days until they could go on to the US. Every airport in Eastern Canada was filled with giant airliners parked, and hundreds of thousands of passengers had to find shelter. Towns opened their gymnasiums and fire halls as shelter for the travelers, and people opened their homes to as many travelers as they could. The tiny town of Gander, Newfoundland, had a big airport because of its history as the refueling stop for transatlantic flights when planes still needed to make a refueling stop. So it received 7,000 stranded passengers and managed to find shelter for all of them for days. There were many official expressions of gratitude to the people of Eastern Canada for receiving all those stranded flights, and the Gander experiences have even inspired a popular Broadway musical, Come From Away. Later, the news started reporting how many people had died, especially in Greenwich, Connecticut, adjacent to my town of Stamford, where so many people working in the finance industry in the World Trade Center had lived. All those people in their 30s and 40s who died. It made a huge hole in Greenwich, as so many of them were community volunteers. The girls' soccer team lost its coach, likewise the high school track club. Many churches lost wardens. And of course, there were suddenly so many orphans for the schools to be working with. After 9/11, we got into the era of homeland security and increasingly stringent border crossing rules. I remember how rude the homeland security agents were at first, and the many stories of people detained for hours in airless rooms because their names were similar to those of criminals or other people on special attention lists. It was definitely guilty until proved innocent when crossing from Canada into the US in those days, in spite of the long history of friendliness between New England and the Canadian Maritime provinces. The agents have been trained in courtesy since then, but there is still apprehension when one approaches the land border crossings into the US. You can't take anything for granted now. Canadians used to go back and forth so casually, particularly to shop. It was common to hear people say that they were going down to the States for a long weekend. My perception is that that is much less than it used to be. Border crossing is not a friendly experience anymore. The effects of the attack on the World Trade Center have gone far beyond the people who died that day and the property damage. It's my opinion that the US has become a different place, with so much emphasis on militarism and advanced weaponry for police forces, and even more freedom for individuals to own guns. Huge sums of money have been borrowed to fight in Iran and Afghanistan, and so many people have died or been maimed in those wars arising from 9/11. Could the people who planned 9/11 possibly have foreseen how much damage they were doing to the US?